Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and of course from the ministry Quo Vadis for their invitation. Today I will give a summary of my life story and focus on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and bodily autonomy. So I am from Chile, South America, and you can see the picture there of the grapes. That's from my family's farm vineyard. We grow table grapes. So I will first give you my two favorite verses that I am claiming this morning also, that God will help me. One is, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. So I claim this for my life and for my children, family, and for all of you, that God will guide us in our life, that He will show us where to go. And this one, therefore go. God told this to Moses. Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. So whatever I had planned to say, I asked God to take control and teach me what to say. Okay, so a little bit of introduction to my history. I am from Chile, South America, and the picture that you see in the background, that's the farm, the one that looks like green in the bottom, that's the vineyards for table grapes and hills. We have a farm in about 2 hours away from the capital city, an hour and a half really, and also we have a business, a tire business in the capital city. How did my family become Adventist? My grandfather, I believe this was around the late 1940s, my maternal grandfather, the father of my mother, became very sick, and he had a business relationship with a German. This German escaped from Nazi Germany because he was not willing to fight for the Nazis, join the army. Everybody had to join the army. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and his conscience did not allow him to fight for the Nazis, and he escaped Germany and came to Chile. Chile was a good second option. Of course, he probably would have preferred to come to the US or Canada, but many of these countries had difficult immigration systems, so it was easier to go to Chile. So there in Chile, this German who escaped Nazi Germany because of conscience, as a Seventh-day Adventist, met my grandfather and helped them to get better, because my grandfather was sick, taught him about the health message, and my grandfather became a Seventh-day Adventist. Okay, and this German man taught my grandfather and all the rest of the family the principles of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, all our teachings as Seventh-day Adventists, the health message, about being vegetarian, about keeping the Sabbath, all of that. And these important values I have inherited them. So then my maternal grandfather also passed this information to my paternal grandfather, who was also not Adventist, but he became an Adventist because of him. And so both sides of my biological families, paternal and maternal, became Adventists around that time, in 40s and 50s. So that's how we came to value the principles of health, freedom of speech, and religion. So how did we come to the United States? My family has a grape farm, and my mother for a while was in charge of the export of the grapes. So we would come from Chile to Philadelphia in the beginning of spring, late winter, and when the grapes were ready, because Chile is the opposite. So the beginning of spring would be for us like our fall. In other words, grapes are ready at the end of summer. So that for the US would be the end of winter, you know, so it opposite seasons. So the grapes would be sent to the United States. My mother would receive them in the port in Philadelphia. Our grapes would come to Philadelphia at the time, and I would help my mommy inspect the grapes in the port in Philadelphia and help to check how much the amount of grains that were falling off the pedestals, and if they were, you know, the percentage of them that were rotten, etc., and the size, and what quality they are arriving in order to help to set prices. So that's how I started coming to the United States. We were coming back and forth very often. Eventually, my mother, at that time, my mom was single. She had married and been divorced, and my mother put me, my sister, and she had 2 small boys also. She put us in boarding school, and I went to a boarding school in Arkansas, Washita Hills Academy, a very conservative school, and they had an agriculture program, and that had a great impact on me. Washita Hills Academy, I learned a lot there. And there I started colporteuring, you know, canvassing, and I deepened my experience with God through colporteuring. Eventually, I came back to Chile, started studying agronomy, agriculture engineering, and came to Andrews. I mean, eventually came back to Chile. Long story, I'll keep on going. Came back to Michigan. So traveled to different places in the world. So this is just the outline. I'm just going to go into detail. So I went into, the tire business. So this is our table grapes from our farm. You can see there. And there's a picture of the business, Supermercado del Neumático. That's my family's business in Chile. Means supermarket of tires, or tire supermarket, because we sell tires for cars, you know, cars, trucks, mining, you know, all kinds of tires. And the red building there, which is an old building, a couple 100 years old, that building has the original business on the side, and the newer business there you can see on the top. And we have several branches throughout the country. And you can see a picture of Santiago, the capital city, where the business is at and where I was born. You know, it has big mountains, and when I was born, those buildings weren't so tall. You know, there was no sky risers when I was born, but the city has developed a lot. So, and as you can see, right now, if you go to the business, the tire business, if you log in right now and want to look for tires, you can't. It has that sign that says Happy Sabbath. We're resting from Friday to, you know, to this time. So from sundown to sundown, you can't buy tires even online. So, yeah. So that was all thanks to that German guy who escaped Germany, and my grandfather, who was open-minded enough and to listen to the message and to recognize the truth. Okay, so I came back after I told you the story about being in the U.S. for grape expert. I came back to Chile to study agriculture engineering. Why was I interested in agriculture? First of all, my family had a farm, and I think naturally I'm very observative. As a kid, I would notice the little bugs walking around, and when we would go to the ocean, I would especially like looking at all the invertebrates, and I knew the names of many of, you know, organisms and plants, you know, all kinds of insects, and I was interested in how they behaved, and I wasn't so much interested to play with kids or with toys. It's like I would just be like focused on the natural world. I had a big interest in the natural world, and And my family had a farm. I liked agriculture. I decided that I would study agronomy, agriculture engineering, and I went to Chile to study. There, I had many experiences there. One of them was kind of negative, but I can see how God was guiding in my life. One of them was kind of negative in the sense that when I arrived in the university there in Chile, I was recently coming from the United States. My grandfather asked a driver, kind of like a chauffeur, because we had all these businesses, and he had a guy who would do things for him, like an errand guy. He asked him to drive me and my sister in my grandfather's car, which back then was a Mercedes, to the university in Chile that was 4 hours further south from the capital city, Santiago. So when I arrived with this chauffeur and everything, a guy in the university noticed that, and he decided he put his eye on me, and he started working on getting me. So I was, every Sabbath I would go across the river from the university. There was a poor community across the river, and there was no nearby bridge. You had to walk a ridiculous distance to go to the nearby bridge, so we would just actually cross the river, very cold, so we would cross the river and get all wet and then change on the forest on the other side, and then give Bible studies to, poor communities and teach people how to read, even adults, older people. I was trying to teach how to read and have lessons with children and all those things. But this guy noticed that and asked to be sent to this mission work with me. He was Brazilian and I knew Portuguese. I speak 4 languages. So he said, why don't you put me with Marisol, because she speaks Portuguese, she could translate for me. So anyway, he worked on me enough, giving me cards and flowers. Eventually we got married. It was a scam, he married, he, just as a story, how, a little bit of my testimony. He stole everything I had, because, once I bought a property, I built a house with my work, corporating work, and I was pretty dedicated, and my grandparents also gave me some stuff. So bought a land and built a house, and when I was studying for my exams, my Calculus 3 exams, hard Calculus 3. I don't even know how I survived that one. And so I was having exams of calculus and a few other exams. It was final exams, so I had like statistics final, statistics 2, and I had, calculus exams and a few others. So he said, you're so busy. You don't have time to do all the paperwork. You had to register the house with the city. You had to, somebody need to inspect it and make sure that everything is up to code. Is like the paperwork, So you don't have time to do that. Give me a notary power and I'll do everything for you. He said, well, I gave him the notary power once he had all the paperwork ready, and I came back home one time from one of the exams. He told me, I never loved you, I only married you for money, everything is mine, go. Anyway, I lost everything. It was very tough. But I did get depressed. I'm not superhuman or nothing. So I did get depressed, but eventually I stood up and decided I'm just gonna get up and keep on going, and decided I would finish my degree in the US. So I said, I'm just gonna study agriculture in the US, and I was thinking where to go, where I can study agriculture. And in North America, there's only one university that has agriculture. Guess what it is?
New York City.
Andrews, SDA. There's many universities that have agriculture. I'm talking SDA and teach that is Seventh-day Adventist and have agriculture program. Mainly, it's Andrews. I found a few others, like there's the university in Argentina, but I didn't want to go to Argentina. And then there's like an agriculture university in Papua New Guinea. I was like, nah, I don't want to go to Papua New Guinea. So, I mean, I'm sure it's very beautiful, but I thought, okay, Andrews is a good choice. So I came to Andrews. So I came to Andrews to study my last year of agriculture, my agriculture degree. I already had so many classes that I had in Chile, so I was able to transfer most credits. I only had one more year to seal the deal and get my degree. So I was in Andrews. I did really well. First of all, I have very big interest in science. I always was very observative of the natural world, and I had taken already so many chemistry classes, and every single class I had taken, and therefore, when I was in Andrews in classes, I did really well. Like, I knew the answers and everything, and unbeknownst to me, my professors in Andrews noticed this, and they contacted Michigan State University, and they said that I was graduate school material, and 2 professors from Michigan State University offered me assistantship. So in other words, I could study my master's and PhD at Michigan State without paying anything, without all my tuition paid, and they would pay me a salary to study. So it wasn't very much. Back then it was like 1,500, it went up to 1,800 at the end a month to be a student, But I thought it was a pretty good deal because I was all my tuition paid. They would buy my computer. They would pay all my trips for conferences, science conferences, and they would pay me money so that I could live meanwhile I was studying. I was like, where do I sign? Okay, so I didn't think about that one very hard. So I accepted that. I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know that you could study, for free, and they would pay you to study. I mean, many young people know those things now, but I had no idea. So that's how I ended up at Michigan State. And in Michigan State, I did my master's and PhD there. While I was in Andrews, I met my husband. My husband, Goran, is from ex-Yugoslavia. There's a gentleman in the back, his name is Soran. Maybe you're from ex-Yugoslavia too, are you? I am. Oh, okay.
I'm not a scammer though.
No. My ex was from Brazil. Oh. My new husband, my current husband is...
My wife is from Brazil.
Okay. So my first husband was Brazilian, and that one was bad, okay? But now I'm married to a Yugo, a Bosnian Serb, actually. And he's good. I met him in Andrews, okay? He's good. I'm still married with him. We have 3 children. And he lost his leg in the Bosnian War and became Adventist, after this experience, for people sharing literature, after the war, which was pretty risky because they weren't very tolerant, not a lot of religious freedom going on during or immediately after the war there. So I did get married again, and I do have a husband and children, and that has been a blessing to me. My children are beautiful, good. I have a good relationship with all of them, and my husband has been very supportive and helpful. And without him, I probably couldn't have gotten a master's and a PhD because he's helped with the raising of the kids and been supportive through the many challenges that I'm going to tell you about next. So as a student at MSU, the situation is not at all like it is now. It was much better. There was a lot more freedom of speech, a lot more freedom of religion. I did have a couple challenges. One, I was a believer, Just like now, I believe that God created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. And that's why we keep the Sabbath. By the way, if we don't believe that God created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested, there's no point in keeping Sabbath. There's no point to be a 7th-day Adventist. It all falls apart. The foundation of all biblical beliefs, the foundation of being a 7th-day Adventist is creation. Without that, it all falls apart. Okay? So, studying science in the Department of Entomology, that's insects, and studying science in a major university, R1 institution, research, R1 means research is the #1 priority. And Michigan State is an important university. It is #1 in many things, you know, in many science areas. And but studying in a university like that was challenging in the sense that most of my professors were either atheists or agnostics, and in the classes I was expected to answer questions in the evolution. So the mechanism that I adopted was a student, I would say, this is what you want me to say. I would write, this is what you want me to say, and I will give the answer, but this is what I believe. And so I would, that way they knew I knew the answer, but I would say that it was wrong, you know? And that way I could get a good grade while not violating my conscience. It worked. Most people were tolerant enough. I remember even in my defense, one of the professors says that no intelligent person cannot believe in evolution or something like that. So I did get darts, you know, once in a while, but I was able to survive that. One of the biggest challenges during being a student was that I was being forced to join a union. It's the Graduate Student Union. And I am really morally opposed to unions. I believe in freedom, and if anybody likes unions, you can like them all you want, okay? But I don't like unions because they destroy companies and they coerce governments to do things that I think are wrong. They get this political power and this funding and use it politically for causes that I do not support. And Ellen G. White says that one of the things that will bring the United States down are unions. So trade unions. So I didn't want to be part of the union, and I was told if you don't become part of the union, you can't be a graduate student. In other words, they get rid of me. And I'm like, you can get rid of me, I'm not going to join the union. Okay? I'm not going to join the union. And I received a lot of pressure, and even one time, one of the union representatives came to talk to me very firmly and pretty much told me that I will be dismissed, and I did shake. You know, I was a little bit shaky, you know, but I told him, nope, I'm not going to join the union. You can get rid of you. I'd rather stop being a graduate student than join your union. When they saw that there was no way, they didn't get rid of me because I did get the master's and PhD. But my professor also was on my side and supported me. He supports unions, but he doesn't seem to support coercion, because whenever I was even now, he's not my professor anymore. I kind of took over his job, but even now, throughout these situations, he still supports freedom. Even though he supports all the opposite causes that I do, he still thinks that I should have the right to believe differently, which is a wonderful thing. That's getting kind of rare, by the way. So that was kind of a test at the beginning. And unfortunately, Michigan, the state of Michigan, passed new laws with our new governor, Gretchen Whitmer, they have removed the ability to opt out of unions. So this was a move against the freedom of conscience. The right to work law, that you have the right to work even though you don't join a union, that has been removed in Michigan. So our governor in Michigan is an anti-freedom person. She was extremely tyrannical during COVID. She even put rules that you could not buy seeds. You know, the areas of the garden part of the stores were like barred off and roped off, and ridiculous rules like you could ride a kayak, but you could not ride a motorboat, you know, during COVID. And other such things. So she was a tyrant, but a bit of a ridiculous tyrant. But that's one of the things is that that this has been a movement against freedom of conscience. So after I finished my degree at Michigan State, I got a job in Saipan. You guys probably haven't heard of Saipan, but Saipan is an island close to Guam. You guys heard of Guam? Guam is kind of close to Japan. Okay, the United States has a big army base there, and there was many battles in World War II with Japan in the Northern Mariana Islands. So I got a job in the Northern Mariana Islands as the entomologist and nematologist of the Northern Mariana Islands. That was a fun job. I had to go in this little plane, you know, plane with like 5 people could fit, and travel between islands and help growers and help them identify pest and disease and give talks, and a funny experience that I had in one of these talks that I had to give, and I had to travel to other islands besides the Northern Marianas to give talks. I remember one of the talks that I gave, you know, training people in agriculture and pest management and crop production. One of the members of the group that was coming, that was actually coming from the South Pacific Islands, he shook my hand. I said, "Nice to meet you." He told me, he was older, maybe in his 70s, and he told me, "When I was young, I ate people." So I was like, yeah, he did tell me that, because he was from the South Pacific, and just in case, not in Saipan, there was never cannibalism there, but in the South Pacific, you guys know that there was, you know, Papua New Guinea and some islands in that, you know, in that surrounding area. So that guy told, which was a weird thing to say for sure, but just to tell you what kind of life I was living back then, you know, in Saipan. It was an adventure. I was traveling to different places and talking to people that had all red teeth of chewing so much betel nut, and they're all human, and we're all one race. We are all children, descendants of Adam and Eve, and Noah and his wife. So all humans, all people are my family. And I had a good time. Many of them became very good friends. I still communicate with people in Saipan. And it was a wonderful experience. I also worked in similar job in Hawaii for the University of Hawaii. I worked for the University of Hawaii for 3 years. When I was in Hawaii, I was contacted by Michigan State that my professor had retired, and whether I would take his job. And there you can see the news there. Marisol Quintanilla joins Department of Entomology as the new applied nematologist. That was in January 2017. Okay, so I came back to Michigan State on January 2017. Okay, so I'm a nematologist. Just quickly, I'll show you what nematodes look like, so you don't have to be doesn't have to be such a mystery what I do. I work with nematodes. Mainly, my focus is nematodes that parasitize plants, that affect pests of plants. So this is a plant parasitic nematode that feeds on plants. The fungivore nematode, bacteriivore nematodes. There's nematodes that feed on bacteria. These nematodes that are omnivores, these are all pictures that I've taken when I was a grad student. Omnivore nematode, and there's nematodes that feed on other nematodes, another soil microorganism. That's a carnivore nematode. So nematodes are an important part of the soil food web. So, long story short, I finished my degree, came back to MSU. I am now as the nematologist at Michigan State University. I provide information, do research, help people solve pest and disease problems that are related to nematodes. I get many grants. I've gotten millions of dollars of grants. That money doesn't go to me. It goes to my program to hire grad students, to hire technicians, to hire postdocs so that they can do research and answer questions of growers like potatoes, root lesion nematode in potato that are involved in potato early die. Soybean cyst nematode is one of the #1 pathogens of soybeans. So I work with soybean cyst nematode, with corn, fruits, nematodes that affect all kinds of fruits and all kinds of vegetables and all kinds of, row crops, etc. All right, so just as a aside, during my work here at MSU about a year and a half ago, maybe it's going on, about a year and a half ago, I did my DNA, and I think you did yours too, because you keep on saying that you have a 1-something% Coptic Egyptian. So you couldn't have found that out without the DNA. So I did my DNA. I was curious because I have a family member who was telling family stories and stuff, and I wanted to kind of confirm and find out more about my family heritage. And I found a big surprise. A big surprise. I found many things that were very big surprise. But one of the things that I found out that was a big surprise that shook my life and challenged my identity of who I thought I was and changed my life was I found out that my dad is not my dad. That was a big thing. And long story short, my biological father was a relative of my mother, and they kind of messed up. And the person my father that I grew up with, that I thought was my father, very kind man. He, I guess, my biological father and my biological mother, they kind of messed up and lied and pretended it was somebody else kind of thing. It was a secret all these years. And I found this out through DNA. And it truly gave me an idea about why am I alive. It was a situation I should not have been conceived, and I should have died because my biological mother and my biological father were set on abortion because they were close relatives and cousins, and they had decided that they wanted to keep this secret. They were afraid of my mother's father, my grandfather, who was a very tough man, and some people got involved, including my mom's official boyfriend at the time. When he found out that she was pregnant, he's not Adventist. He's from a Catholic family, and his father was the General of Police of Chile. He was very important police, and he was like, "You get rid of the baby," because abortion was illegal in my country, and pretty much threatened my mom, "If you get rid of the baby, it's not going to go good with you." So, and he was thinking that I was his baby. Anyway, so the father that raised me saved my life. I should have been aborted. I should have not been conceived. That was a mistake. And they would have aborted me 100% if the laws in Chile did not exist, and the father who raised me was not firm about this. So So he's not Adventist, but I've given him the message several times. He did stop smoking when I was young. He did stop drinking maybe many years ago, and he understands the Sabbath, etc. He needs a few more steps to be totally faithful to the truth, and I'm praying for him. My biological father died in 1981, and he would not have died if he would have decided to live by the truth and live not by lies. I suspect his death was not natural and related to the situation. And so he was, I know that living through the truth is the right way. Living through the truth and saying the truth and doing the right thing is the right decision. Okay, so that's a story that I'm telling. That was quite the discovery for me. I also discovered that I'm mostly Spanish from Spain. I am like 4%, Chinese and Indonesian. I have an ancestor that came, that was brought to probably Peru and then Chile, and then he came to Chile from China. Back then, a lot of Chinese were being brought to different places, even including South America, as a replacement for African slavery, because we know that slavery was abolished. In England was pretty much destroying ships. Because of the work of Wilberforce, you mentioned Wilberforce, because of the work of this great man Wilberforce that dedicated his life to abolishing slavery. Thousands of Englishmen died in the ocean rescuing slaves from ships that were being brought to different places, rescuing. So the Atlantic slave trade was severely hampered, because of the work of the Wilberforce, the English army, and also being made illegal in country after country. The last country to make it illegal was Brazil in the year 1888. In the year 1888, Brazil abolished slavery, the last country in the Americas to do so. When this happened, when slavery became illegal in several countries, many people still needed work, cheap labor, and they started bringing labor from China. They would bring them from Hong Kong. Or the area, or the Guangdong region, the land mass close to Hong Kong. There was Macau. Macau is right there. That belongs to Portugal, and Portugal will get people from Macau to the mainland Guangdong and ship them to different areas, Peru, and different areas of the world to work in cotton, mining, etc. So I do have an ancestor from China, and I have an ancestor. I have some North African ancestry from Algeria, and etc. But mostly from Spain. I'm mostly from Spain. Okay, so about conscience and MSU. So things at MSU and the world, Michigan State University, pretty much all university, the world, including sadly Canada, and Canada is one of the worst examples. Religious liberty, freedom of speech, and medical autonomy has been on the downturn. Anybody notice this? Yeah. Okay, so I'm not alone in noticing this. Good. So it's been a downhill slide for liberty of conscience, liberty of speech, bodily autonomy, and it's all connected, by the way. If somebody doesn't let you talk, They're neither going to let you practice your religion freedom, and they're not going to give you bodily autonomy. It's all connected. It's all connected. Freedom is all connected. Okay? So, first came COVID. And I gave a talk for Cuba that's pretty detailed about COVID yesterday. By the way, what time do I have to?
Midnight.
Midnight. All right. Midnight. Okay, you guys, it's midday, so you guys still have till midnight. Now, I'm definitely
About 12:30.
12:30. Okay, so 12:30, so it's 12:22. So I'll be in a couple extra minutes, I think. All right, so COVID came, and it was weird since the beginning. You know, the COVID situation was weird since the beginning. First, it started in China. I think the way that China reacted had an impact all over the world, because they locked down, and they locked down Wuhan internally, and it seemed to have worked, or they said it worked. And I think that kind of set off a chain reaction. And I really, it doesn't seem to have been a natural origin of COVID. It seemed to have come from a lab, from gain of function research, which I believe is unethical research. I want to set this very clearly. And unfortunately, shamefully, the United States was involved in this. There was grants given to the Wuhan lab through an intermediary, intermediary, the Eco Health Alliance. There's still the possibility it came from a natural animal reservoir, but I think that possibility is pretty small. Okay. So I think the possibility that it escaped from the lab is pretty high. At least to me, I think that's the way it happened. Okay, and it started in China. People started getting afraid. The universities, the news were really putting a lot of fear out there. People were afraid. And then in Italy got a big wave of COVID, and they were playing the news in Italy, and I think once it hit Italy and people were dying in Italy, I think people really thought this is going to come here and we're all going to die. Okay, all right, we're all going to die. That's the way people were thinking. The data was not quite that way. Even the data from China and the data from Italy was clearly showing that COVID was very age striated. Okay? It was affecting people in the very high age range, and even at those ages, only people with already other health conditions, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, other things. Most people who were healthy, going outside, eating healthy, COVID was not killing them, okay? But the news were not really telling the full story back then. So even young people, even 20-year-olds, even 30-year-olds were afraid that they're gonna die of COVID. And a lot of fear. And I don't think people act very rationally when they're afraid. That's one thing. We should try to not make decisions based on fear. We should try to make decisions based on reason and logical reasoning. Okay, and I think the news made sure that most people did not make rational decisions. So people were very afraid, and people were willing to give up the freedom of association, the freedom to go to church, their bodily autonomy, the freedom to go see their grandparents at the nursing home. People died alone. Some people in their last days of life, they had to say bye to their loved ones to a screen. And I believe that all those things should have been optional. People should have had the choice to risk. People should have the choice whether they preferred the small risk of dying of COVID and not die alone and see their families one last time and give their blessing to their loved ones. People should have had the options of whether they wanted to travel or not. Well, anyway, so COVID brought a lot of ends to liberty. And since there was tremendous censorship, things could not be said. The truth could not be said. And I almost got fired by MSU. MSU had vaccine mandates. I decided not to get vaccinated for a couple of reasons. One is that I already had COVID before this mandate came through, and I knew I had natural immunity. There was a very important paper, Guo et al., 2017. This paper talked about SARS-CoV-1. SARS-CoV-1 was the original SARS. By the way, COVID was originally called SARS-CoV-2. Okay? So it was SARS-CoV-2 because it's a SARS virus. Okay? So SARS-CoV-1 was happened in Asia, 2003, 2004, and a paper came out in 2017 checking on the immunity of the people that got SARS-CoV-1 in the years of 2003, 2004. They still had immunity 12 years later. I mean, 2017 is not 12 years later, but the paper, takes a while before you publish a paper. So the data. They still had immunity. Their T cells still reacted and they still were protected. Doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get it again, but they have a much more minor reaction and their chances of dying were very minor because it's like you know how to deal with it. It's kind of like when you have experience and you've dealt with a specific problem before, you're like, oh, I know how to deal with this. I dealt with this before. Okay? So they already knew how to deal with it. So I knew, even though this was a different coronavirus, it's a very similar coronavirus. And the experience from SARS-CoV-1 should have been assumed to be the case for SARS-CoV-2. Amazingly, it's like they started from scratch. They did not believe in natural immunity. None of the knowledge that we have accumulated as humans about diseases, and specifically on coronaviruses, which is the common cold, and for example, SARS-CoV-1, none of those principles were being applied to the new coronavirus, which was really weird and fishy to me. And like I could read this paper, this makes sense, but they're not acknowledging this, they're denying. So I did not get vaccinated. Also, the vaccine was very different than previous vaccines. This one, because of mRNA, it gave the instructions for your own cells, for our own cells, to make the spike protein and expresses on the outside of the cell, and the body's defense system, white blood cells would see the spike protein and make antibodies to the spike proteins that your own cells produce. This is not how previous vaccines were done. And I thought to myself, there's no dosage control here. Your own body is producing this. Therefore, you can't control the quantity that's being produced. And I even thought it early on. If my own cells express this spike protein, won't the immune system attack my own cells? And does this mRNA that's being injected, does it only stay in the muscle, in the deltoid, or does it spread around? And if it's spread around, where does it spread around? And how long does this mRNA that is inside this lipid nanoparticles, how long does it stay viable in the body, still telling the body to produce spike protein? All of those questions were not answered. The side effects were not known widely and were not being readily acknowledged. And one thing that I clearly thought out, and I thought it would be unethical for me to get vaccinated, because the way that I thought about this is that coronaviruses adapt very quickly. That's why it's hard to get a vaccine for a cold virus. You know, they change. You know, influenza is, you know, same thing like the flu. You know, the vaccine for the flu, it needs to be updated every year, and it's like a hit or miss. So coronaviruses are the common cold. They change quickly. It's not like polio. It's not like some vaccines are highly effective. In part, is because whatever organism they're working against doesn't change so quickly. But this one changes quickly. So I thought, if everyone gets vaccinated, even those that don't need to, which I didn't need to because I had natural immunity and I didn't have the complicating factors, you know, the age and the diabetes and all those things. If I get the vaccine, all I'm doing is promoting the virus to produce variants that will be resistant to this immunity. Because it's like, what happens when you spray the weeds with the same herbicide for decades? You get herbicide-resistant weeds. Anybody who is a farmer knows that Roundup no longer works in certain weeds. What happens if you use the same antibiotic against bacteria? Decade after decade, you get bacteria that are resistant to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Okay? Why wouldn't COVID do the same? I thought, even at the beginning, why wouldn't COVID? And in my letter of exemption I wrote to the university, the more people get vaccinated, the less effective the vaccine will be. If we really want to protect the vulnerable, the vaccine should be optional and only advised to the people with high risk factors. Right. This was what made sense to me. And anyway, they did not believe in freedom of speech, and they were willing to fire me. Thanks to the village church, they had a special program. They brought a lawyer, and Jonathan Circle. I took a lot of notes and wrote a letter of exemption. Anyway, it did get approved, but some challenges in between. After this big problem with COVID, came other challenges of conscience. I think they got empowered. The people that like to control others, they felt empowered, and they started putting DEI mandates, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which sounds beautiful. But some of the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion are diametrically opposed to biblical teachings. Okay? One is that God teaches us that we're all one human race. And we should treat everybody equally. Diversity, equity, and inclusion teaches that some races should be treated with preferential treatment and be hired over others. In other words, some are more equal than others. Okay? Like the Animal Farm of George Orwell. Also, DEI really focuses a lot on LGBTQ issues and forces affirmation. It's like, for example, I believe we should not drink. I believe we should not drink. Alcohol is very negative. It destroys body. And I believe being alcoholic or over drinking is a sin. But I don't control people. I don't take away their drink from them. But what they cannot do is force me to say that drinking is good, that drinking alcohol is good. And what they're doing is they're forcing me to say through their forms, etc., forcing me to affirm things that are against my conscience. Another great example is like adultery or fornication. The Bible clearly says it's wrong. It's a sin. However, I work with people that live together, that all kinds of situations, I don't get in their business, I'm not controlling their behavior, but what they cannot do is force me to say that fornication is good, that adultery is good, or in this case, that behavior that's involved, like LGBT issues, that they are good. They cannot force me to say that a man is a woman. A man can be a woman. He just puts on a skirt and suddenly becomes a woman. That is not true. It is biologically not true. Because to be a woman, you need to have you need to have organs that are organized to produce large gametes. Large gametes are eggs. In other words, you have ovaries and fallopian tubes and all of that. I understand that the young, some are immature and some people are older and no longer producing eggs, but they have those organs that are designed to produce eggs, okay? So that's a woman. And males have organs designed to produce small gametes or sperm, okay? And for most people, the vast majority, when they're female, they have XX chromosome in every single cell of their body. Almost every cell of their body, and male is XY. So they would have to have a transformation or a transplant of every single cell of their body would needs to be changed. Anything else, clothes, makeup, surgeries, this is just, it's just cosmetic. It's just external, but it doesn't change the biology. And they can't force me to lie, and that is what is happening. We are being forced to lie. We are being forced to lie, even atheists. And I'm friends with some very, very important or well-known scientists and atheists. Even atheists, some of them, it's against their conscience to lie and goes against reality and go against science. And people should have the ability to say the truth, okay? And sometimes, they need to have the ability to be wrong also, okay? Because freedom of speech is only free if people that we despise or beliefs that we think are wrong can be said, okay? If things that you don't like cannot be said, that's not freedom of speech. If you say, oh, I believe in freedom of speech, but only for the things that I agree with, that's not freedom of speech, okay? That's not freedom of speech. But one of the biggest dangers right now for freedom of speech and freedom of religion is the LGBTQ lobby, okay? Yeah, unfortunately. So, so there's been a mandatory affirmation of DEI and gender ideology. And I wrote a couple of articles about this. One is from Heterodox STEM. I belong to a group of scientists that are heterodox. And I wrote this article called "The New Gender Ideology is Being Used to Coerce Speech at Universities." And I wrote that article and all hell broke loose. All my past problems look small compared to what happened to me after I wrote that article. It's like the lion cage was open, that I got threats even from people that I knew, even from people in my own department where I worked. Threats, even people saying that I don't deserve to live. And and pages of insults, every single insult. Transphobe, homophobe, racist, misogynist. I even got called a white supremacist. I'm like, I don't even know what that means anymore. I guess it means somebody I don't agree with or something. Or, you know, somebody who believes differently than me, because, you know, it's ridiculous, really. So, got called all kinds of things. And my article mainly said, mammals, humans are mammals. Mammals are sexually dimorphic, okay? That means male and female. And males produce small gametes, sperm. Females produce large gametes, eggs, or at least they have organs designed to produce large gametes or small gametes. I quoted Richard Dawkins, which is the most well-known evolutionist in the world, really. And he said, in 2022, he wrote, sex is pretty damn binary. Male versus female is one of the surprisingly few genuine dichotomies that can justly escape censure. In other words, there's male and female, and it's biologically proven, and it's one of the most firmly established scientific facts. Okay, this is not in question. No matter how much baloney they throw at you, it is not in question. That's the rest. So I wrote this article, all hell broke loose. Different people, including in my university, started working to get me fired. Talking to my department chair had many meetings with me, saying that I had to take the article down. And I said, no, I'm not going to take the article down. He also said that I'm not allowed to use, because I put Marisol Quintanilla and I put there that I'm Michigan State University and that I have a PhD. You can see this in the next slide there. They said Marisol Quintanilla, PhD, is a nematologist at Michigan State University. So it said that I cannot use my MSU credentials because the values in my article do not match the values at MSU. And you know what? I said, my MSU credentials belong to me. I got them. They don't belong to the university. They don't belong to the university. And why would anyone think that my article is supported with MSU when I'm speaking against what's happening? I'm saying that I'm being forced by MSU to support, to affirm these values that are not real. I'm being forced to lie. How could you say that my article would make people believe that MSU supports my values? Obviously, I'm speaking that MSU is against my values. So it was a big battle. I want to thank God because the law is on my side. Okay? The law is on my side because there's been several cases in the United States, several cases, and a group called FIRE. FIRE is a free speech group that I belong to, and if any of you guys get in trouble, I recommend them. They're very good for defending free speech. They're bipartisan. Not everything that they do I support, but it's a very good group for support of free speech, and they compiled a list of cases, legal cases, that went on my side because I can use my credentials, and I have the free speech to write what I think. The university cannot tell me what to say or what not to say. Thank God. Amen. Thank God. We need to pray that things stay that way. We need to pray that things stay that way. But if you're silent, things might not stay that way. Because when I was going through this, some professors send me secret emails from their personal email. Some from like Proton Mail, where the emails kind of self-destruct after they're sent, kind of thing. They send me emails like, I support what I say, but I support what your position, I support what you're saying, but don't tell anyone. And I responded back, please stand with me. Please speak up. because I'm the only one receiving all these fires and all these darts. And people think everyone agrees. And I saw that many people, even professors, many of them don't agree with this, but they're too afraid. They're cowards, and they just sit by. They sit by, and they just listen to the hate and the situation happen to somebody like me, and they don't say anything because they're afraid the same thing will happen to them. Because the strategy now is to demonize you, is to treat you in such a way that anyone seeing what they did to somebody like me, they're like, I'm not going to say anything because that's going to happen to me. But if humans were not so cowardly, if the majority of humans were not so cowardly, this strategy would not work. Because if 20%, if 30% of the professors, say my department, would openly say no, in the university, they would say, this is not right. We believe in freedom of speech. And by the way, there's only male and female in humans, and a man that puts on a skirt doesn't become a woman. If many of them, when I said with me, they would have no power to bully us. What about with COVID? If many people, if the majority of people would have stood up and said, you can't coerce people to take an experimental medical treatment. People need to have the freedom to choose. People need to have the freedom to choose whether they want to die alone or die with their loved ones. What is the risk when you're about to die? You're already about to die. Why would you have to die alone? The risk of COVID is so small. And if people are willing to take that risk, let them take that risk. But if people would have been brave, this would not have happened. If people would have been brave in Nazi Germany, the Holocaust would not have happened. The majority of people did not think it was right to kill people, to kill the Jews just because of their race. But people were afraid. People were afraid because everyone was a snitch, because their neighbor would tell on them. They were afraid that they will end up in concentration camp, that they would. Some people were deceived, easily deceived and manipulated. Some people were too cowardly, and only a few stood up. Only a few, who knows, maybe 10% or less, stood up, like Bonhoeffer, or a few people, or like this German man that escaped Nazi Germany that taught my family to become Adventists. A few stood up. Only a few. These things cannot happen. Nazi Germany and the Holocaust cannot happen if we are not a bunch of cowards. So we need to stand up and we need to speak up. A group of scientists, you can see the names there, Dorian Abbott, David Bertolli, and Luana Majora. Also, we wrote an article talking about the changes of Title IX. Title IX is a law in the United States that protects sex in universities, so that women can have, separate spaces, separate sports. Okay. The Title IX is a law that is about 50 years old, and the Department of Education and the Biden administration is trying to change that, to redefine sex as gender identity, to make it mean nothing. So that means that men can enter into women's spaces, and in other words, make it meaningless, okay? Because if woman does not mean an adult human female that has organs meant to produce eggs, it means whatever you identify is, woman doesn't mean anything anymore, okay? And the same thing for male, okay? It stops meaning, the meaning becomes irrelevant, okay? So, and it reduces freedom of speech. I put that there is freedom of speech, freedom of religion. There's problems of freedom of religion. People who believe that God created them male and female now will have problem in universities okay? And they will be forced to violate their conscience. Protection of women in spaces, children, girls will be forced to have males in private spaces. Women's rights, scientific integrity, forcing scientists to lie, etc. So we wrote this article. You can imagine that this brought me some trouble also. Recently, I was a co-author in a paper, a very important paper, with 29 scientists, including 2 Nobel Prize winners. And the paper it's about merit, in defense of merit. In that website right there, indefenseofmerit.org, you can find the paper. And you can find where it has been covered. There's been articles in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and newspapers all over Europe and all over the world about this. I was directly interviewed by the New York Times about a month and a half ago. The New York Times called me, interviewed me, and I told them the situation with DEI. And our paper, the main objective of the paper, is several scientists. Not everything in the paper I agree with, but I agree with a large amount. One of the main objectives of the paper is support of objective truth. Support that hiring, in science especially, should be based on competence and merit. That people should be hired because they know to do the job, not because of their gender, race, or anything, because this kind of thinking does not help anyone. If a doctor, let's say you have a doctor, let's say of Indian descent or whatever, and let's say he's an excellent doctor, but some people may think, oh, maybe this person was hired because of, you know, this diversity things, and then you will not have confidence on that doctor, and maybe their colleagues will view him as less than, and this is not fair to him. If he's an excellent doctor, he should be viewed as the excellent person that he is, and not have the stain of being a possibility of a diversity hire. That makes sense? So I think it benefits no one. It affects science negatively, because instead of hiring the most competent person, you might be hiring somebody who is not more competent. Like, for example, somebody like Albert Einstein. What about if he wasn't willing or wasn't able to write a good diversity, equity, and inclusion statement? If he was living in our times, he probably wasn't very good at that. And would have he been hired to allowed to do physics? Would we know about the theory of relativity? Would we know about all these great discoveries of Einstein? Probably not. So people should be hired because they're good at what they do, and not because of their race, not because of their sex, and neither because of their politics, or their ideology, or their religion. Okay, so that's the main point of the paper, and we also talked about that in science. Science is losing objectivity. Many scientists and journals now are supporting things like the gender ideology, which is pseudoscience and nonsense. Okay, so, and dangerous, really dangerous for children especially, to kind of remove their basic identity. So we wrote this paper. It was rejected from most important journals. It had to be published, and of all places, in the Journal of Controversial Ideas, because it got rejected from most journals, even though we had Nobel Prize winners as authors. And we had many scientists, very well-known scientists, chemists, physicists, mathematicians, and little me, okay? And so we had many scientists, me the least of all, okay? And it was rejected. It was only accepted by the Journal of Controversial Ideas. This became a big story. Wall Street Journal wrote an article, New York Times wrote an article, and it came out in many podcasts and many news all over Okay, so you can see that's not the paper, but that's a web page where you can find the paper and find all the articles, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc. And mainly it's talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most of the co-authors in this paper are atheists or non-Christians, so these are not people like me, believers, but they're people who believe that their truth exists and reality exists, and we need to search for truth, and freedom of speech should be allowed. And in science, that science is a search for truth, and this can only happen when we are able to debate ideas, and also that hiring should be based on merit and competence and not on race. Okay, so that's the article in the New York Times. I got you. If you read it, I'm in the middle part of it. I was interviewed. It has my name on it. I want to thank Fire. Fire was a big supporter in all my struggles. They have been big supporters of the Chicago Statement, which is a statement on support of free speech in universities. I'm starting a free speech alumni group at Michigan State University. We must all defend freedom of speech and religion and speak up. Like I said, this cannot happen if people are brave and stand up. The more of us are brave, the less power the censors can have. So I will say the verses again that I started with. I believe that God has guided me in my life. I'm thankful to be alive. I shouldn't be alive. And I believe that God has led me to this point. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. And the verse that God said to Moses, now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth and teach thee what thou shalt say. And thank you very much for your invitation.